Good. Hey, Jed, how are you? Jim,
Good. How you doing?
Lisa, good to see you all.
Thank you.
Well, there, all right. The YouTube has gone live. So we will begin if everybody's ready. Uh, Good evening. I'm Daniel Drake, Chair of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. I call to order the March 9th, 2021 Airport Commission meeting. We are using Zoom webinar for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting and can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. People registering as an attendee must use their full names, otherwise they will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. Attendees will join in listening mode and they can click the raise hand button if they choose to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hand in the order in which they were raised. If you do not have an audio capable device, you can use a call-in number. We will not be using the YouTube chat function. All questions should be directed through the chair. As a preliminary matter, permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present. Commission members, when I call your name, please respond. Arthur Gasparo.
Here.
Tony Buscarin.
Here.
Andrea Planzer.
Here.
Jeanette Topham.
Here.
Airport staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tom Rafter, Airport Manager.
Here.
Noah Carberg, Airport Assistant Manager.
Here.
Lily Sylvia.
Here.
Katie Perales. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Rich Lasden of McFarland Johnson, Inc.
Here.
Jed Merrow of McFarland Johnson, Inc.
Here.
Lisa Kammer of Weston Solutions.
Here.
Jim Sokup of Weston Solutions.
Here.
The open meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth resulting from the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The governor's order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. We do also allow public participation as outlined previously using Zoom webinar, and we will have a public comment period at the end of the agenda. As previously noted, for this meeting, the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar and broadcasting on the Town of Nantucket YouTube channel. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting meeting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Before we now turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules to provide for the effective and clear conduct of our business to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Thank you. Are there any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. Are there any additions or corrections to the draft minutes of the February 9 meeting? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve those minutes? Somebody, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparo. You're seconding it, Ms. Planzer?
Second, yes.
Thank you. All those in favor? Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Is there a motion to ratify the warrants of February 17th, 2021 and March 3rd, 2021?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Topham. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. How do you, all those in favor, how do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Mr. Rafter, would you like to go over the pending leases and contracts? Why don't you hold the airport gas one till the last? Because Mr. Gasparo is going to recuse himself from any discussion there.
Okay, we have a lease amendment with the United States of America FAA for the air traffic control tower. It's an extension of their lease as we continue to negotiate a new agreement. They have some new requirements we're going through with them. Then we have a contract with the Shane Group for $134,364. That's for an electric tug, and I apologize, it's a tow barless, not tow barreless. It's a tug for moving aircraft around. We then have a contract amendment with McFarland Johnson for $24,445. This is an amendment to task order PN09 for the fuel farm PFAS investigation. You may remember we had initially asked for a not to exceed 10,000, which was approved, but it exceeded it. So we're back now with the new amount. And then we have another contract amendment with MJ for $4,900, adding survey work to the Nobody Airways study area. Again, another PFAS related item. And a contract with MJ for $15,200 on the Waterline extension, expanding the scope to include Skyline Drive. And then the last is a contract with McFarland Johnson for $47,300. This is the tank compliance services that they provide to us, and this is for a 2-year contract here.
Thank you. Are there any questions about any of those? Is there a motion to approve the list of lease amendments and contracts, beginning with the U.S. Department of Transportation and ending with the McFarland Johnson task order for compliance services?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mrs. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Do you want to mention the sublease? Will you mute yourself at least, Mr. Gasparo?
This is a sublease request from Airport Gas to Kevin Deneen LLC, local electrical firm. They want to sublease their what was previously their office building and some storage space. They've moved over to their new facilities on Bunker Road, and they're asking for a 2-year sublease. We had some of this discussed previously, and there's one item we want, I think we want them to accomplish, and we've been working with them on, and that's removing some storage containers that are on the existing site. They contacted us today and identified who the contractor is going to be, and they're hoping to have them out of there within the next 10 days and onto the new site over on Bunker Road. So I would like to ask the commission to approve this, subject to the removal of the storage container units that are on the property today.
Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the consent of sublease for airport gas to Kevin Deneen LLC?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Planzer, how do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Ms. Topham,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. You may come back, Mr. Gasparo, if you'd like. Thank you. All right, moving on. The home rule petition for the capital approval process, Mr. Rafter.
Yes, we heard back from the Representative Fernandez's office that the home rule petition has been filed and will continue, or I should say NOAA will continue communicating with our reps to hopefully keep this moving through the process. As I mentioned before, again, we're facing something this year where luckily we don't have to ask for an extension because the 2 grant agreements that we're going to be filing will have known numbers on, and Gail Luttrell from FAA has said that they will hold our entitlement money and it won't be impacted. So that's good news. On the PFAS, I'm going to turn it over to Noah. He has his monthly update, and then we have a presentation from the consultant on the water main extension and the soils testing results. So Noah.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dan. I'm going to defer my discussion of the water main and data for down agenda presenters that you'll have before you. They can do a much more detailed job. I'm coming back to you this month on the IRA status report frequency updates. In the packet for your review, we have what we're calling an interim data submittal. This is a non-regulatory document that takes the place of the IRA status reports, which are now being filed with the DEP at an interval of 2 times per year. In addition to the IRA status reports, we're proposing these interim data submittals to also be biannual as well, or more often as needed, generated by a major data event for a total reporting timeline of 4 reports per year, or quarterly instead of the monthly to which you're accustomed. The major notes from this interim data submittal is that it's updated with the recent fuel farm area investigation, and performance sampling for poets has been accomplished. And this is also a item that we will post to our PFAS website. It's available for the public. It's just not filed with the DEP because it's not a regulatory document. For water service briefly, because Rich will touch on this briefly, we've met with all but one affected West Side homeowner in the field.
Excuse me, no, before we get on to that, are there any questions on the PFAS update?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Gasparo.
I appreciate these interim reports and, not just going to the biannual. And I think the quarterlies will work, but I'm just wondering right now where there are still samples that are actually awaiting results shown in this report. Will we be updated? Will you get, do we have to wait a whole another 3 months? I'm sure that we're going to hit a point that you'll have received all the samples, but it seems to me right now you're actually still in a sampling and reporting period. And I notice on figure, I'm trying to tell which page it is, but figure number 3, it still shows some of the properties as awaiting samples. I don't know if those are retest or if they're, so my question is, can we be updated until we hit a point regularly until we hit a point that all samples, at least initially, have been received?
Haven't we done that already? Received all the initial samples?
So
Do you mind if I?
Go ahead, Ms. Scammer.
We have, for all of the properties that we've received access to, we have all the initial data for. There are only a couple of properties on the west side that we have not been able to get access to. And so those are the ones that we are awaiting access for. And then of course, if we do get access and do sample them, we could provide you with an interim data submittal similar to as we did this time.
Would that be adequate, Mr. Gasparo?
Absolutely. That's what I was just hoping for, is to stay until you at least get the initial on all of them. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay,
No problem.
thank you.
Great. So for the water service, as I mentioned, we met with the homeowners in the field and we reviewed their site and the process with them for water service installations. The commission has previously approved the policy, which I've reattached in the packet. I've also presented, I believe it's on page 145 of the packet, a summary matrix of issues. My major goal with my report is to walk the commission through the elements, further information, and possible consent. One note, we have met with an additional homeowner since I published this matrix in the packet, so there is only one remaining. So the major item is, with only one exception, homeowners have expressed their concern to me that they or their tenant will now have a water bill to pay. Certainly I would like to give the residents an ability to summarize their arguments directly to the commission, but I would characterize their concerns about having a future ongoing out-of-pocket expense. I believe they would probably characterize this as a fairness issue. I want to represent that I'm not unsympathetic at all to their argument, but I wanted to be sure to represent the counter argument to you today, and that it's related to revenue use. There are going to be limits on what the commission can do here, being bound by FAA revenue guidelines that will guide against assuming bills in perpetuity. I'm in the unfortunate position of arguing that bringing water to these properties adds a value to the property. And I believe this is something that, ultimately staff can make a recommendation to the commission on solving this issue, or the commission can make their own decision. I'm not trying to tell the commission what to do, but I'd advise that maybe we make some resident feedback and counsel available on that issue.
I think we should try to resolve it sooner rather than later. So can we do this at the April meeting?
We certainly can. So universally, residents do want to retain their wells for irrigation, which is really just a matter of mechanics and something we can accommodate. There's an additional cost for the airport to separate out the drinking water and the irrigation systems, but it's offset by not assuming the cost for completely abandoning and sealing a well. At this time, there is still one well we need to physically locate, either through a records or a site review. We could not find it on a property. At some level, there's landscaping involvement and hardscaping involvement in most cases at each property. This is anything from trees, hydrangeas, to hardscaping in the shape of pavers or shell driveways we'll have to fix. I think that's no surprise. And then the other interesting topic is,
excuse me, Mr. Carberg, I did notice, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I did notice in the slide preparation that's been done for this meeting that there is a reference to the fact that the water company will bring the water service to the house, not just to the property line.
correct. The water company will provide excavation and line to the house foundation. I think Rich can clarify later if that is inclusive of coring through the foundation where appropriate.
Yes, they've said that they will install the water line up to and into the house.
And so
But the hookup is on us, right?
The interior plumbing is the plumbing contracting proposals that we've been trying to get.
Right. Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to jump the gun there, sorry.
No problem. The interesting case is where build out is either planned on a property or reasonably anticipated. I characterize our council generally advised in favor of the airport accommodating this work. Some of the issues that he put forward for us is that we really can consider this on a case-by-case basis on very unique situations and our ongoing scientific understanding. That there's an established argument in favor of efficiency, for example, doing all of the work now for a potential build out, instead of having to come back at a later time when a property is built, especially if there is reasonable suspicion that we could exceed 20 parts per trillion. And he made a number of parallels to airport-sponsored soundproofing installation programs related to block grounding. So he's very comfortable with us accommodating this. One item that hasn't come up yet is,
Excuse me, again, for clarification, Mr. Carberger, are you talking about buildup that involves involves using the same well, the existing well, or a new well?
it would be out of the existing well, but where there is an opportunity or a plan to build a second dwelling on a parcel.
I thought the town didn't allow that anymore. We should check that.
Okay, we can look into it. And the last item is, I use the example of a direct pay for repair. For example, if we were impacting a property owned by a landscaping contractor and we had to remove Leland cypresses, the concept was that we could issue a credit to the homeowner as someone might receive for an insurance adjustment for their vehicle. This is allowable, but so far all homeowners have been happy to have the work done on their account. Those are the summary of the water service items. One more I'd like to move on to before the presentation. And that is, we've met with our affected leaseholder. We've had 2 meetings. We're reviewing with them if their operations could have impacted PFAS on the airport. Had the opportunity to review the site data with them, their LSP firm. And they're working to provide us with some data related to drainage changes. We're reviewing an on-site well network that they have available that we didn't know existed, and we'll look to our LSP on the best way to integrate that into our site data, not only for sampling, but for well elevation, which can help further define groundwater contours. If there are no questions, I believe I'm turning it over to Rich.
Are there any questions?
Are we going to be paying for as well as the well hookup or the water hookup as well as their water bills over the years or not?
That's the question. Some of them some of them want us to pay them indefinitely. And we've got to determine some legal questions, but I want to resolve, as I said a few minutes ago, I want to resolve this as quickly as possible. So I've asked Mr. Carberg to come back to us at the April meeting with the airport's recommendations.
Okay, well, I have my own well, but I have to pay for my sewer. And I pay for my home $400 and some odd quarterly, and for my cottage 200 and some odd. So that's one of the figures, and I don't know if we want to get into that much money for all
Well,
of,
that's the sewer is another question.
but it's the water. I'm paying the water bill for it.
Well, you pay the water company. The water company collects for the town.
Yeah.
And as I understand, I don't get one, but Mr. Carberg, I know you get one. Isn't the water bill separate? I mean, aren't they itemized on the bill?
They are. That
Yes.
is correct.
Okay, well, I just get a water bill from I get a bill from the water company.
Right.
So I'm just thinking how much that costs me and what we were going to be hooked up for, or having to pay that for other people per how many homes we've got to do. So
Right.
just wanted us to think
Well,
about
we'll have all that information to talk about in
Okay.
April.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead then, Mr. Carberg.
Okay, well, with your permission, I believe I'm turning it. Rich, I believe the water main is next on.
Yep. So do you want me to share my screen and bring the presentation up?
Sure.
Please do.
Okay. Does everybody see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the water service has 3 components that we've been working on. The first component is the Nobadir Way, and that was the area that Mr. Carberg just spoke about. The houses that are impacted are sort of pointed at and outlined in red. There are 8 buildings that require water. We've contacted 7 of them and done site visits. one of the property owners is not available until April, so we will obviously reach out to that person when they are available. And we've done some coordination with the town to determine what the agency requirements with the town. So there is a plumbing permit required. There is a street opening permit that's required. The police department does want details depending on, like specifically Airport Road. They're going to look for police details as we do that work. There is no HDC coordination required, so that's hopefully helpful. Regarding the installation coordination, as Mr. Carberg just indicated, we have done site visits with most of the homes with the plumber to get a handle of what the interior work looks like, and we are waiting for them to provide us with proposals for each individual home. We just spoke about one comment is in discussing with Mark Willett from the water company, he will open the street, put in the main tap, put in the meter pit, and then bring the water up to the house, including pouring into the foundation.
Excuse me, Rich, I don't know if you're moving to other slides or
Yep.
I'm still just seeing the first slide, if that's
No, he's
correct.
still on the first slide.
No,
Okay,
no, I'm on the second slide, actually.
Are you?
that's why I
Yes.
thought it was,
All right, let me,
Oh, you're on that slide. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm on Nobadir Way slide. Are you
Yeah.
not seeing that?
No, I have it up separately, so I'm
All
sorry.
right, hold on. Let me close all this. Okay. Let's try it again. Apologize for that.
looked like you shared, but maybe shared another version. I don't know.
Well, let me try it again.
I don't have anything up there.
Yeah, I'm going to try sharing it again.
Okay,
We've got page 1 still.
Okay.
you want to go to,
Let's. This is an old one. Never mind. I apologize. Oh boy. Let me try to find it again. I apologize for this.
You want me to try to share my screen? I think I have it up.
Okay, perfect.
Let's see what happens.
there you go, Katie.
Okay.
Okay, so you guys
This
see the
is-
first page?
Yeah, but that says March 3rd.
Oh, okay.
There's a March 9th version.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to, oh, stop share. Okay.
While we're waiting, I was in an FAA conference today and it took me 20 minutes to get into one room because they had to move everybody over individually in a Zoom.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
So tell me, Rich.
Slide 2.
Okay.
Okay. Does everybody see slide 2?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Let me know, like, move to the next slide, like, give
I
me
will.
verbal cues.
So we have been engaging with the plumber on site to do site visits to each individual home. I believe we have all of them visited except 2 now. The one we haven't been successful to being in, and then 1 more home that we have to do an individual visit for. And I think that's scheduled for this week. So we are waiting on proposals from them.
How many plumbers are you talking to?
We have contacted more than 10, and we have 1 that's called us back. And so that is the one that has been actively engaged in doing house visits.
Okay,
But it's been quite a struggle to find a plumber that would,
right.
one, even call us back, and two, has shown interest.
Welcome to Nantucket.
Yes. So,
And busy plumbers.
yes, busy plumbers. So Common Water Company, as we indicated before, has indicated to us that they will do the work all the way up to including coring into the foundation. So that's a great help. And then we are in the process, as Noah mentioned, finalizing the homeowner agreement with the legal counsel and yourselves, obviously. So that is an access agreement, and it's an agreement that would discuss the water bills, if that's going to be part of it, and it will discuss yard restoration and interior plumbing and all of the things that we need to do, essentially to create a contract between the airport and the homeowner.
Will we see that in a draft at the next meeting, Noah?
I believe you've already seen the framework for it early on,
Well, I
maybe
think-
last fall.
I think we should see it again.
Yes. So, okay, next slide, please.
West side.
Yeah, west side slide, yes. So the west side is specifically Skyline Drive. And there are 2 homes on Skyline Drive that are impacted. And the plan here is to extend the water line from Woodland Drive down to Skyline Drive. And we have been coordinating with the water company who's actually providing the survey for us. So once we get that survey information, we should be able to quickly finish up the design of this piece of the extension. Next slide, Katie. Oh, yeah, Matacasham Valley Road. So there was a whole series of environmental coordination that had to occur. The Natural Heritage folks is an ongoing coordination. We've actually submitted the MESA checklist last month. It's a 30-day review. There was a little bit of a wrinkle in this, in that the south apron, the south run-up pad, or the runway 6 run-up pad, when we did some soil testing, we discovered some PFAS contaminated soil. So we had to relocate the pipeline out of the contaminated soil. So in discussions with the Natural Heritage Office, they indicated that we could show the design in areas that were not cleared by them, as long as we follow up during construction and actually do a plant survey at that time. And they were willing to accept that. And so that's what the plan is for that. The Conservation Commission, we coordinated with them. They've taken no filings necessary. They said they don't have any concerns on the project along Matacasham Valley Road, which is an excellent thing to occur. MESA also has indicated that they will not take jurisdiction on the project. And SHPO, or the Mass Historic Commission, has also, we've done some investigations and there's no significant cultural resources. So we have clearance from them also. So we've gotten all the clearances that we need in order to be able to move to construction once we get the permit from MESA.
It should be in another couple weeks.
Hopefully in the 30-day period, they're supposed to give us an answer within 30 days. And then at
Okay.
that point, we can finalize our design
Great,
and put it out to bid.
wonderful.
Next drawing. So what I've done is I've attached the drawings. You can go to the next slide, Katie. And one more slide. So this is the overall picture of the water line that starts just outside of Airport Road, or Montahansett Road, goes around the end of the runway 6, crosses the end of the runway, and then meanders sort of down Matacasham Valley Road. There's a couple of areas, as we've previously talked about, that will require directional drilling. And the rest of it is open cut.
How deep is this line buried?
It's, the water department wants it buried 4 feet. That's their standard, which is based on the frost level typically for a water line, based on the area
right.
of the country you're in.
Right.
So, okay, next slide.
I can't see you all, so if anybody has any questions, speak up.
So these are just extensions of the actual work. That's big picture drawings. Next slide, Katie. That's as you enter the airport. It's essentially you enter the airport off of Montahanset about where the existing contractor gate is that Lawrence Lynch built, and then you head down the perimeter road. Next slide, Katie. And then here as you cross the end of the run-up pad, this is where we had to adjust the layout of the water line to go around some PFAS contaminated soil. And then we will do directional drilling under the end of the runway. That'll allow the runway to stay open and not impact operations. Presumably this construction will be going on this summer at the height of your season. So if we can not impact your operations on the runway, that would be beneficial, I believe, to everybody. So that's what this is shown. Next slide. So here's, we finished crossing the rest of the airport, and then we head out into Matacasham Valley Road. It takes a series of sort of odd bends and turns as it twists its way to try to follow the traveled way. We've had many discussions about the traveled way is not in the right of way, and we, the town, don't own a lot of the right of way. So it made it easier to just run it down the traveled way, which happens to be for the majority on your or the airport's property. So, and then we branch off into the impacted homes. And then, for instance, the Thompson house is impacted. So the water line goes all the way to and will go into the house. Whereas other homes that are not impacted, we will just put a stub out to the curb stop. And then should the people in the future want to connect the water in, the work will be done, including out to the curb stop. Next slide, please. Again, this is an example here. You can see even the traveled way is not owned. If you see the right of way, we had to directional drill around the traveled way because even some of the traveled way is now owned by somebody else. So it was a very interesting survey and property rights investigation. Next
Is it
slide.
excuse me, Rich, is it
Yep.
going across land bank property?
No, when you get to, we'll get to that a little further on, Mr. Chairman, and at that point, we directional drilled back into the right of way to stay, because the traveled way is in land bank property. But according to Blackwell, the land bank's not allowed to give out easements. So it went back into the right of way.
Okay.
So you'll see there sort of at the end of the drawing where it comes
Right,
off.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then it comes back into the right of way for the remainder of the project. Okay, next slide, please. And then we pick up the last couple homes. So you can see here, in the sort of the middle of the picture, you see it's sort of snaking down the driveway. In discussions with MISA regarding limiting the impact of habitat, it was their opinion that if we stayed in both the traveled way and driveways and lawn, they took a less concerning view that it was habitat. And so that's what these drawings have done, is stayed either in the traveled way or in people's driveways or in developed lawns.
And where has the water company agreed on this project to also pay for the line up to the house?
So I want to be careful on the term pay for it. I think they're going to install it and then back bill you for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, now I understand.
I guess one of the benefits to the airport is that the water company has hired their contractor through the public process.
Right.
So they've already met the requirements for publicly bid work.
Right, got it.
But they are planning on back billing you for the work.
Okay.
But as far as this project here, no, this entire project is going out to bid.
Right.
This is not going to be done, although we still haven't finalized the individual home connections. And that's one of the things that you sort of, when you see the last slide, one of the things we have to do is sort of figure out that. And since most of these people are seasonal homes and been challenging to get a hold of them, it might be worth it to put this out to bid, to build this infrastructure completely out, put it out to bid next month and build it all out to everything but the house and the work inside the house. And then we can deal with the houses sort of one-off as they come back, or we can find them and get them, rather than hold up the bid until we can talk to all these people. But we still need to sort of finalize that piece of how we're going to put this together.
Okay.
Next slide. This is, again, this sort of showed the two options of retain for irrigation or abandon the well. At this point, it seems most people are asking to retain it. So this sort of is just a one-line diagram on what needs to be done. Next slide, please. Just some standard details. These are details we got right from Wanacommet. So these are their details. These drawings have gone to both the airport and Wanacommet for review. So we are waiting for comments from Wanacommet. Next slide, please. Just some general construction details. Next slide, please. So here's the sort of the last slide is the next steps. Plans are in review. We need to schedule the homeowner meetings to discuss project and connection options, finalize the traffic control and advertise for bid. So the traffic control, I had some beginning discussions with NOAA, and I will continue those discussions on how we are going to create a detour road, for lack of a better way, to allow the street to remain open while we're building the water line. So the people, there's not only there are homeowners there, but there's public beach access, there's your property. So we are in the process of engaging in some discussions with NOAA and most likely the town after that, since they'll have to, it's a public street, so they'll have to get involved as far as police and fire access and public access. So those, one of the things that, one of the big things left to do. That's the presentation.
Okay. So you're probably not expecting many of these homeowner meetings to happen until April, May, or June, right?
That's correct. At this point, and again, we just started having that discussion yesterday that maybe we put this out to bid without that answer and build the whole water main and build the house and build it, and the contractor builds everything up to the, essentially to within the foot of 5 feet of the house.
Right. Would it make sense for it to be an option for the homeowner to have their own plumber do this work and we reimburse them under certain, under whatever
Yep.
guidelines we want?
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't we do this on Nobody? Why wouldn't we do it up on Nobody Way? The same thing.
Ask them to do it?
See if they want to have their own plumber do it.
No.
I don't know whether that presents us with a procurement issue of any kind, but
Yeah, I don't know. We might have talked about that. We also thought that maybe if we offer one plumber, quote, all of the work, if that was the case, then maybe we got a better price because it was, potentially 8 houses he was doing as opposed to a bunch of one-offs.
We could get a plumber.
Right.
yeah. I'm just wondering if it isn't worth trying that. At least floating if there's no illegal obstacle to do it, at least floating the idea with the Nobody Way homeowners that we've talked.
Well, I think there might also be on your part a desire, if you do it, it's done. If they do it, it's on a poet system until they get it done.
100%, but maybe we put a time limit. I don't know. It's worth talking about.
Yep.
I think if we, through you, I think if we have a plumber that's willing to do this, I would suggest that we stick to the one plumber, because I know I have a son-in-law who's a plumber and he's extremely busy.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. If you've got somebody, Rich, but I don't know, that's up to the committee.
Well, let's see how this plays out with this person that they've been talking to.
Yep.
So, okay. Any further questions or comments on the waterline plan?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Gasparo.
I would just say thank you for, the efforts of the consultants and staff and how, quickly this did advance. I think in terms of projects that we've seen and speed and given the urgency and everything associated with it, it's really good work. And I would say thank you. And then I would also just note there is an attendee with a hand raised. I'm not sure if you saw that.
I can't see that. I'm sorry. Let me.
It's open.
Here's an attendee with a hand raised. Mr. Sidlowski, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I just, I noticed in the presentation that.
Would you
were running
identify
the
yourself?
water line-
Excuse me, would you
Oh, yeah,
identify
Tom-
yourself?
Tom Sidlowski, Surfside. I noticed that the water line is running along the west boundary of the airport from Evergreen all the way down. And I know a number of residents in the Surfside area would like to tap into town water. We're not talking about necessarily people who want you to pay their water bill, or they would like to find some way to do that because they are concerned about the water. And I wonder if if there's any way we can contact someone, or we could deal with the idea of seeing if the opportunity could be offered to people who are nearby that line and what the cost to them would be.
Noah, do you want to take that?
Sure, I'll answer and then defer to Rich if I misspeak. As spec by Wanacom Water Company, that line of the water main is being built out of material that is more easily tapped. And I believe the method for anyone wishing to access that water line outside of the airport's project is the same as it is now for any resident where water service is available. And I think that would start with contacting Mark Willett at the water company, but I will clarify that and get back to you over email, if that's okay.
If you could, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Noah.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on the water line?
No, but Dan, I think the next portion of the presentation, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, is on the soil test results.
Right.
Right.
Now, who's gonna do that, Ms. Lasden?
That's Lisa and Jim.
Great.
Right, I'm gonna try sharing my screen and
Hopefully more successfully.
wish me luck. All right. Let me know if you can see the presentation page.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to talk about the source soil investigation. We'll be running through the purpose of it, the scope of it, the results that we got, some immediate response actions that we took, and a preliminary evaluation of the data. So the purpose of the soil investigation is multifaceted. We included this as part of our immediate response action plan under the MCP. We wanted to assess these known application areas for the presence or absence of PFAS. Some sampling was done in support of the Taxiway Echo project. We wanted to identify areas of critical concern and obtain some data that would better inform our additional and future investigations that we intend on doing. So this is an overview figure. Everybody has seen this before. I included it here just to point out the 9 known AFFF release application areas. Starting from north to south is sort of how we'll run through this with the runway 24 approach, the snow removal equipment building, the Stroney lot, runway 1533 mid. And we'll go up here to the south ramp at B, fuel farm, South Rapid J, Sand Pit, and then the runway 6 run up. So runway 24, we had, in this location, we did 4 soil borings down to the water table, which was quite deep, down around 50 feet. And we did soil sampling just below ground surface at the water table, just above the water table, and then at the midpoint in between those 2 elevations. And what you see is some low-level detections of only one of the 6 regulated compounds, and that's perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, or PFOS. So not a lot of impact observed here.
I think, Lisa, the other thing to note on this one before we move on to the next is that you're correct that the levels here were very low. They were below the MCP cleanup criteria. And also they were only in the shallow soil samples. We didn't see anything in the mid sample or the sample above the water table. So this tells us that what we have here is very, very minimal contamination or minimal levels of PFAS. They don't exceed any of the cleanup goals, and they're also, it's superficial. It doesn't extend down below the surface soil. So at this point, we're not anticipating that we're going to have to do any more work at this location.
That's correct. Thanks, Jim. All right, moving on. We're at the snow removal equipment area. This is one location that sort of popped up on our radar later, or I guess more recently, when we found some photographs that showed a combination exercise with the Nantucket Fire Department. And some of those photographs we saw, a truck parked here and shooting in the foam across the fence and at this soil pile right here. And interestingly, what we saw is that, again, like we saw at runway 24, mostly shallow impacts and closer to where the truck was parked. And here we do have exceedances of the DEP S1 soil criteria, and different than the runway 24 approach. It's PFHPA, PFOA, and PFNA. So some different compounds that we're seeing here. All right.
Again, they're fairly close to the surface relatively, right?
They are, yeah. So these, again, 2 feet and above is where we saw the impacts in this location as well.
And the concentrations overall, although they do exceed the MCP cleanup criteria, they are fairly low. They're not very high. So that does suggest that the impacts in this area are fairly minor, but there will be some remediation required. We will need to do additional work here to define the extent of the contamination, and then develop a cleanup plan for this area. But it looks like overall the impacts are pretty minor at this location, which I think is consistent with our conceptual model and our understanding of the application that took place here, where it was kind of a one-off event.
Right, moving on to the Stroney lot. Similar here as the snow removal equipment building, we see PFHPA, PFOA, and PFOS. At this location, PFOS is detected, but not above criteria. And then we have exceedances of criteria of the other 3 compounds, but again, those are, or I'm sorry, 2 compounds, PFHPA and PFOA. But again, similar to the snow removal equipment building, this is exceedances, but still relatively low in comparison to some of the later data that we'll look at.
And again, also, I'm sorry, Lisa, that you're done.
Nope.
But also there's mostly shallow contamination. We don't see it at depth, extending at depth here.
Yep. Yeah, in this area, there is some material storage going on here. So we were able to put these boring locations in the best place we could based on the information we had on where the application areas were, taking into account some of the material stockpiles. So there, again, like the snow removal equipment building, we will be doing some additional delineation in this area as well.
Okay.
Runway 15 mid, we had one sample from one of the four locations where PFNA was detected above its criteria in the 0 to 1 foot interval. So pretty good here. It'll be a minimal amount of additional delineation that needs to be done, followed by some soil removal in the shallow intervals. South ramp at B, this is work that we initially, we broke this up into two chunks because we needed some initial data to support the taxiway echo project. And so that's the 0 to 1 and the 1 to 2 data that you've seen before are presented here as well. And what you'll notice is that we still only have that 0 to 1 exceedance of PFOS in SRB-1 right here. So I think we have, this area is probably pretty well delineated. We might have a little bit of additional work to do just to reduce the amount of soil removal that happens. That's
Yeah, and in this area too, it's kind of a developed area, so there are swales that are kind of between the taxiways for stormwater runoff management. And the sample that we collected that exceeded, so the SRB, I think 01,
yep.
Was in basically the low spot. So that's the area that you would expect, foam applications to pool in, and any runoff from that area where the foam application was applied would end up there. So that was kind of our thinking. That was the worst case location for this area, and that was the one where we had a detection. So again, that suggests to us that very minimal impacts at this location and shallow.
Right.
Before we move off that, I should, we've talked about a couple different areas now where we've had very minor contamination for the most part. The contamination appears to be shallow. There are some that we need to do some minor additional shallow soil sampling to fully define the extent of the impacts. But I should note that our intention is that we will do a groundwater grab sample at each of these locations just to verify that we don't have groundwater impacts at those locations that are from that application in those areas. So we will verify that the contamination in those areas is not reaching down to the water table and contributing to the impacts that we see in the groundwater that migrate offsite. So we don't believe so based on the soil data, but we will verify that.
Thank you. Moving on to the fuel farm area, this location was a little bit different than the other application areas because of the way in which AFFF is tested here. It is part of the fueling system and the storage tanks for the fuel, and it's not, to our knowledge, something that's been, applied to the ground surface in this location. So we approached this in a different way, where we were following the process that the airport uses to maintain compliance with their SPCC and pumping water from the containment areas and discharging it into the catch basin, which you can see here. We've labeled as FF01 catch basin.
Sorry, and I hate to interrupt, but I think it'd be good to set the stage for why we think that's different, and so that the more specifically the application of foam in this area. In the other areas, it's the fire truck running out to the location and spraying in an emergency type situation where they're responding to an aircraft fire or an aircraft emergency. Here what we've got are fixed nozzles that are around the tank fueling farm, the fuel farm, which you can see the 4 tanks there, and then also the fueling pad. So you've got fixed nozzles that are connected to a foam application system in the event of a fire or at either the refueling area or in the tanks themselves. There's an emergency system. Someone can push a button and those nozzles are automatically deployed to put out the fire. So the required testing for those is different, where they have to essentially activate the system. So it turns on the pump and it pumps a little bit of foam out. And as soon as the foam starts coming out of the nozzles, kind of dripping out of the nozzles, they shut it off. So you're not spraying the foam, into the air over great distances. It's coming out of the nozzles and essentially drips within. There's a containment structure around each of these facilities. So there's a containment structure around the tank farm, and there's a containment structure around the fueling pad. And that's designed to catch any spills of fuel as it's transferred either into the tanks or out to trucks to go out to the aircraft. And it's designed to capture those. But so all of the testing that's done of the foam is done within those containments. So that any foam that is applied stays in that containment area. So that's why we weren't necessarily drilling borings or looking outside the containment. The testing of the foam and of the fire apparatus associated with those is contained within those structures. Sorry, Lisa.
No, you can go ahead and keep talking about it if you want.
I just wanted to make sure everyone had a good kind of because it's our sampling program is based on our conceptual model of how these things were applied, and that's why it's different from when we're looking at some of the application areas on the runways and also some of the areas we didn't talk about it too much, but depending on what the morphology is of the area where they're applying the foam directs our investigation. So, for example, if you've got a runway mid location where they're spraying on the runway and it's running off the runway, we were concentrating our samples along the edge of the runway because that's where it would run off. Lisa mentioned the one location where they parked the vehicle on the pavement, but then they were aiming at the there you go. They were aiming at the soil pile. So that's why we put the locations where we did. We had 2 locations at the edge of the pavement, which is where anything would run off from the truck. And then we had 2 locations in the direction where they spray the material. So that kind of gives you some feel for how we were selecting our samples. I mentioned earlier about the at B, we selected our sample location in the deep spot in the stormwater swale, because that's where the material would collect. So what we were trying to do is getting a good understanding of what the application looked like at each location, and then adjusting or targeting our samples, designing our sampling program to look at the worst case where we believe to be the worst case locations for where we would expect to see it. All right, I'll be quiet now.
No, it's good. Yeah, so in this case, because the water was being pumped from these containment areas into the catch basin, we wanted to evaluate what was being discharged in the catch basin, which had some standing water in it and had some sediment in it. So we collected samples from those 2 materials, and you can see surface water had a total PFAS-6 concentration of 440 parts per trillion, and sediment had a low-level detection of total PFAS, which actually just ended up being PFOS of 0.66. And something that's important to note is that DEP doesn't regulate sediment and surface water concentrations, particularly for PFAS. So we don't have any shading or anything happening here. But understanding that this discharge could theoretically impact groundwater directly, 440 parts per trillion is a high number. So from there, we also collected groundwater at a well that was uncovered, AC 10, and sampled that well in addition to some of the source soil investigation that we were doing, and total PFAS concentrations were at 685 parts per trillion. So we wanted to know what was going on within the containment areas as well, and what concentrations of PFAS were perhaps leaching out of the concrete that makes up those containment areas, and collected some samples from each of those as well. And we got concentrations of 262, and we took a duplicate sample for quality control purposes, and that came out at 266, which is really good replicability in for PFAS concentrations when you're looking at parts per trillion levels. And then the fueling pad had PFAS concentrations of 179 parts per trillion. So we know that there's an issue at the fuel farm, and we'll talk a little bit later about some remedial actions that we've taken since then. But once we had this data, the airport immediately stopped pumping water from these containments, and it was a full court press to get a treatment system out there so that they could get the water out of those containment areas. You know, they were able to do some work within them until the water got to a point that it was just a hazard issue. So fortunately, we were able to get that system out there and set up and proven pretty quickly. And we'll talk about that system in a little bit. Any questions on this area?
Should just do one quick note here is that so the water that collects in those two containment areas is rainfall, basically. So these are open to the weather, right? So rainfall or snow falling in that area accumulates in those, and the snow melts, and obviously the water just runs off. So that's where the water's coming from. And and our conceptual model there is that you've got PFAS residual from when they do the testing of the nozzles that drips into there. That's either in the concrete or kind of the residual there. And whenever you get the rainfall, it leaches into the water. That's where it likes to be. PFAS likes to be in water, dissolves into the water, and that's how the PFAS is getting into the water, which then is, as Lisa mentioned, is pumped out by the airport into the catch basin.
Well, I'm not asking for a lesson in physics because it would take too long, but it's just curious that where you're directly spraying it on the ground, there's less than there is where there is, as you say, barely a drip method of testing.
Well, you don't have the flushing here that you do in the ground.
Right.
So if you've just got sand, you spray it on the ground. And also the other thing is that there's only one fuel farm. The areas where they sprayed for the application testing it kind of got spread around.
Right.
So this is an area where you're constantly testing in the same place, and it's got nowhere to go. So it all stays in one relatively small spot, and doesn't have the opportunity to leach away. It's all trapped there.
But it's much higher than any of the others. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right.
No, good comments.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to take questions on the specific areas before?
Yeah, go ahead. I think it'd be better than going back.
So thank you for this. One question, given how high the concentrations are in this area and there's only one groundwater well that's being tested, is there a plan or consideration for a couple additional, wells around here to look at this and kind of what's going on?
Absolutely, yeah. This is certainly an area where we've identified, groundwater impacts from this application area. So yeah, absolutely, we need to do a lot more groundwater work in this area to understand what the extent of the contamination is and how far down gradient is going, where it's going, and also to verify that what we're seeing, our conceptual model or hypothesis that we have now is that it's coming from, this application that we just talked about, right? It's getting pumped out of the containment, it's going into the catch basin, and it's leaching out of the catch basin, impacting the groundwater, and then flowing with the groundwater to the south and getting into Act 10. And that all makes sense. But we need to confirm that. We need to confirm our conceptual model with additional groundwater samples. I think getting maybe a little ahead of ourselves, but I think our thinking is that our next phase of investigation out here is going to be to do what we're going to call a groundwater screening study, where we're going to collect a lot of groundwater samples kind of quickly, but not install wells. So we'll just do a push down to the water table, get a grab sample, get it, pull it out, and then run that sample without taking the time or spending the money to install monitoring wells. Get that data back, and then that'll allow us to we can do that very quickly, very efficiently. So we can do a lot of them. So that gives us the ability to look in a lot of different places and get a really good definition of what the plume looks like. And then once we get that mapped out, then we can go back in and say, okay, this is what the plume looks like. This is what the extent of the contamination is. These are where we need permanent monitoring wells for long-term monitoring. And then we'll come back and put in monitoring wells. That way we know we're putting them in the right spot as opposed to, trying to guess.
Thank you.
Next.
Yeah, moving on south. South Rampart J was an area that when we were a little bit surprised when we saw this data. This is I guess the first instance in soil data where we have this purple highlight show up, which indicates that the result is more than 10 times the criteria for that compound, and that is for PFNA. Here we had 5 of the 6 regulated compounds detected and exceeded their criteria at least once. PFHXS is the only compound that was not detected in this area. So what we know in this area is that application happened approximately within this portion of the pad here. Runoff will go over towards SRJ-1, and then there's an outfall that comes under the road here and discharges over this way. But you do see that we have some impacts over here along the pavement as well. And so we'll be doing some additional delineation in the near future over.
Are you suggesting this could be coming from a source off the airport property?
No, not in this location.
Okay.
Yeah, so here it's just runoff across the pad to the west here, up towards SRJ-1, and then SRJ-2 down here.
Right.
The taxiway echo work is coming up, and you can kind of see the change in pavement color here. So we'll be doing some additional delineation over along this area just to make sure that they're not going to be encountering any PFAS impacted soils. That'll be happening in the near future.
And then the longer term, we obviously need to go back. We've got some exceedances here. We've got, and also you can see that in the 01 sample, SRJ01 sample, you can see that the contamination does extend into the deeper interval. So you see it at the 11 to 13 foot, and 18 to 20 foot interval. So we do see exceedances that extend down to the water table. So that suggests there could be groundwater impacts here. Now we don't know that yet, and the concentrations are fairly low, really right just above the standard at depth. Oh, thanks, Lisa. So it may be that we don't have groundwater impacts here, but it's certainly more likely here than the other locations we've looked at so far. So that's something that we'll be looking at too, is doing some of those groundwater grab samples that Arthur was talking about a minute ago.
All right. In the sand pit, in this location, we did also have some exceedances that were greater than 10 times their criteria. And we also see that PFHXS is the only compound that was not detected. All the other compounds were detected at least once above their criteria. And for the most part, similar to the other areas where we have the shallow, 2 feet and shallower detections above criteria, except at SP04, where we saw a very high exceedance of PFOS at the 13 to 15 foot interval. That's at 27 ppb or parts per billion, which is pretty high in comparison to what we've seen everywhere else. And then SP03, where we see exceedances of PFOA and PFHPA at the 1 to 2 foot interval, but no detections at the 0 to 1 foot interval here in SP03. So some more interesting things happening here that obviously coming back out and doing some additional delineation in both the vertical and horizontal extents. And I think, we'll probably be able to see that there's some soil rework happening here that might help explain some of these instances where you see the detections and exceedances at the deeper intervals, but not the higher intervals. This one is a little harder because I don't think anybody's digging down 15 feet here. But additional delineation can certainly help in this location.
Yeah, this location was one of the ones that was used for the longest amount of time. It received the most most applications. So it's an area where we expected to see contamination. Also hydraulically, it lines up with the west end of MVR. And as we know, the homes at the west end of MVR, including the Thompson House, is where we see some of the highest concentrations in groundwater in the wells, in the residential wells. And this lines up hydraulically with that. So we expected this to be a fairly significant source here.
Yeah.
And I think these data kind of bear that out. So it kind of fits with our conceptual model.
Okay.
Runway 6 run up. This was also surprising given the records that we have for the amount, what we felt was a relative to the other areas, a lower amount of application that happened at the runway 6 run up. We have a lot more purple showing up here, which is the greater than 10 times the criteria. We have each of the 6 PFAS compounds detected, and quite a few exceedances. And then, unfortunately, we guessed wrong as to where the detections and exceedances would be. We chose this boring 3 here as our deep location that went down to the water table, and we didn't have any exceedances there, regardless of depth. Just given the way that ground surface is in this location, we would have expected the material to flow off this way. And it, obviously we guessed wrong. And then these are the soil samples that we took in support of the water line design, where it was going to be crossing the airfield here. And we have 2 rows of samples offset by about 50 feet, which is a good thing that we did that, because that first row where the initial placement of the line was going to be had some exceedances in samples 3 and 5. So this is the approximate location of where the water line is here, where these -2, -4, and -6 are located. So this will be an area of additional delineation in support of the Taxiway Echo project that'll be happening sooner rather than later, so that they can get everything remediated before they do work in this area. And we've laid out a tentative plan timeline to get all of this work done, make sure that we have concurrence from all the applicable stakeholders for whatever remedial action we choose or we decide to do here, we propose to do here, and then get that out to bid if necessary, and then not delay that construction schedule.
So if I may, Lisa, this is the area where the contractor was supposed to move into the next phase, phase 3 of Echo. And because of the PFAS, they're now going into 5 and working, as Lisa just said, they're working together to make sure that when the contractor's ready to get in there, that the PFAS work is hopefully completed by then.
Is the run-up pad part of the Taxiway Echo project?
Yes, it is. And there's a little bit of a split as to what may be eligible, what may not be eligible on AIP too. So we're working through that on the finances.
And as part of those stakeholder discussions, we did meet with Mass DEP, and we ran them through these data that we're kind of going through with you today. So they're aware of this. We talked specifically about this area and the potential impacts to the Taxiway Echo, and we talked with them kind of in a conceptual way about how we would potentially handle this contamination. And it was very good dialogue. They were very open to some suggestions that we had, some ideas that we had. And I think they'll work with us to come up with a solution that's achievable with the Taxiway Echo work. What we need is we need to get, as Lisa said, we've got some more data, some more investigation we're going to be doing. Once we get that data, we'll have a better understanding what's out there. We can circle back with them and then have a better idea which direction we want to go.
Moving on.
Go ahead.
All right. We also combined this mobilization effort for the drill rig with the leasehold evaluation up on Airport Road. And that included a variety of different type of sampling. We did continuous soil sampling down to the water table. We did groundwater grab samples. We collected samples from the dry wells and catch basins that they have on site. There's a holding tank that the car wash runoff is collected into. We collected a grab sample from that. We did some shallow soil sampling at an outfall on the north side of airport, the leasehold property. And we also collected groundwater samples at AC 14 and AC 15, which are also relatively new to the program, wells that were previously existing and discovered more recently in our evaluation. So again, we have sediment and surface water data and the wash tank that are unregulated, so to speak. So we don't have any exceedances depicted here. The wash tank data did show that the total PFAS-6 concentrations are above that 20 parts per trillion threshold that we would use for groundwater. We did a groundwater grab sample at the area closest to the Nobadir Way roads here. It's kind of a U-shaped road. And we saw an exceedance there of the PFAS-6 at 29.4. We had higher concentrations on the north side at AC 14 at 79.4 parts per trillion. So that was somewhat surprising, and may indicate that we need to look at some grab samples up here in this park area. We've been evaluating the history of this area to find out what it was used for, what may be a potential source there. And then of course, there's always, with groundwater flowing from the north to south here, there's always the potential for additional upgradient sources as well.
One thing that you might see if you can get, I don't know if we have the information or not, is where the dirt came to fill in the pit that used to be where the park is.
Right. Yeah, that would be interesting. I know we're looking at different records to see what we can find.
Mr. Chairman, I believe most of that came from the Sun Island storage facility.
The one on, well, it doesn't matter. There are a couple over there, but
The first one.
the first one, okay. All right.
Yeah. Jim, do you have any other points?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So I think just to summarize, I think what we're seeing here is fairly complicated. We don't have all the answers for this yet. We do know that they have PFAS compounds that either have been used or are being used on site, because we see it in their wash tank, which is water that's coming directly from their process. So and it's accumulating there. So we know that there is some contribution here. It's unclear at this point how significant this contribution is, or if there's, as Lisa said, mentioning that there's some upgrading source that's also contributing. We do know that we don't have any known airport lease areas or application areas or any other potential sources related to airport activities up in this area. So it's either something historical for the Monument Park property, or even something further to the north, and then we're just kind of at the tail end of it here. So that'll be our next phase of investigation here. We should note too that in recent discussions with the leaseholder, we were told that they actually have 4 monitoring wells on the property that we weren't aware of. So the samples that we collected are kind of those groundwater grab samples that we talked about earlier. So they're all except for AC 14 and AC 15. Those are existing monitoring wells that we found. So those are high quality samples. The other samples are what we call screening samples. So it kind of gives you an idea of, do you have it or do you not have it, but you can't 100% trust the concentration. It give you an order of magnitude. But really what you want is a monitoring well sample. So we're going to be able to go out and or in discussions with, Noah's in discussions with the leaseholder to get access so that we can sample those existing monitoring wells. And we can also use those monitoring wells, because Noah had mentioned earlier, as water level measuring points. Because, we've time and time again, when we've met with you folks, we've relied on the groundwater contours, the groundwater flow directions, our interpretation of those to guide our investigation. Certainly our investigation here, our investigation for MVR, our investigations to the west, are all being guided by groundwater flow. So the better understanding we can have of groundwater flow, the more confident we are that we're looking in the right spot and we're progressing in a logical manner with our investigation. Which actually brings us to this figure. Right, this figure. So this actually, as part of this most recent investigation, and we've kind of touched on this, we found 3 additional monitoring wells. So Act 14 and 15 up by the leaseholder property, and then Act 10, which was down by the fuel farm. Those were newly discovered as part of this investigation. So we had those surveyed by a surveyor, and we collected another round of water level data from all of the monitoring wells on the airport at the same time. So that allowed us to refine our groundwater contour map. And the fact that we had 4 monitoring wells, and now up in the area of the Noberdair Way, Skyline Drive, Evergreen Drive area. So we've got 14, 15, 11, and 10 all up in that area. And the water level measurements that we took correlate very well with our initial interpretation of the water table. So that gave us a higher level of confidence that the groundwater flow is as we have been stating and illustrating on our maps, and that the decisions we've been making with regard to our sampling program are sound decisions. So that was reassuring to get that. And like I said, we've got the 4 additional monitoring wells now that we found. So we will add those to the program as well, which will hopefully further increase our confidence in that groundwater flow direction, which is so key to our investigation here.
All right. So I mentioned before, when we were talking about the fuel farm, some immediate action that we took to mitigate the situation there, and that included renting a modular granular activated carbon treatment system. This is similar in concept to the POET systems that have been installed around the airport, but it's a commercial scale, essentially, meant for higher concentrations, more increased flow, and a more long-term usage, or I guess more heavy usage is what I should say. Each of these vessels has about 1,000 pounds of carbon each, and they're preceded by this bag filter set up here that removes all the fines and things like that might be in that water that's in the catch basin, which has a lot of sediment and stuff like that in it. There's a flow totalizer, so we can monitor the amount of water that's been treated by this system. When we got this delivered, we had it delivered to the snow removal equipment building, and we had to allow the carbon, we had to wet the carbon and then allow it to degas overnight. And then we got it assembled and ran through about 1,000 gallons of water from the containment areas, treated it and put it back into the containment areas. We collected an effluent after 1,000 gallons of treatment to make sure that it was operating as designed. And our overall intended monitoring program for this is a minimum of 5,000 bed volumes or 1 million gallons of treatment for monitoring.
Lisa, if I may too, something that's critical about this is this allows us to continue to sell fuel. If we were unable to sump that area, we would have had the we couldn't, if we couldn't get the water out of the containment, we wouldn't be able to sump the tanks, and then we wouldn't be able to prove that we had clean fuel, wouldn't be able to sell it. So this is critical to allowing us to continue to sell fuel.
Right, yeah. And the crew at AC has been great. Johnny found a trailer that we were able to get it mounted on, so it can be stored at the snow removal equipment building, so it doesn't freeze. And we can, basically cart it around as we need to treat any water before it's discharged. So this initial sample that we took, as I indicated, it was after 1,000 gallons were treated, and we had non-detect values for all of the compounds. So overall, a success for the whole team.
Great.
So now we're going to move into these, what we're calling radar plots. And these help us identify an overall signature of the application areas. And we'll explain these in a little bit more detail. The idea, though, just so you know, is not that you can read everything on these graphs, but that you understand the overall pattern that you're seeing. So you see here, all of these locations, they look the same. And I'll zoom in. Oh, sorry, wrong screen. We'll zoom in on one of them just so we can see. You have the 6 regulated compounds here, and we're looking at a relative percent concentration of each of the detections at each of these locations. And we have the sulfonic acid, so PFOS and PFHXS are on the left here, and then the 4 carboxylic acids that end with A's, PFOA, PFNA, PFDA, PFHPA, are from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So what you see here at the runway 24 approach is primarily PFOS, pretty consistent signature here. Jim, do you have anything you want to add before I cruise through?
Yeah, I guess just one kind of cautionary note in reviewing these, and again, we call them radar plots. In reviewing these radar plots, is if you have low concentrations at a location or in a sample, you got to kind of take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because a lot of times if you have low concentrations, it's going to be dominated by one compound, which is typically PFOA and PFOS, which are kind of the breakdown products, kind of the end point for the breakdown process of the PFOS compound. So, and that's kind of what we're seeing here is these are low concentrations. Remember, this is an area that we're not even proposing any more work. This is the
runway 24.
24, right? So it's you do see it's dominated by PFOS here. But again, just something to keep in the back of your mind. Low concentrations, take them with a grain of salt. Higher concentrations, where you've got a number of compounds, you have more confidence in the
Right.
the pattern that you see.
Right. And the other caution here is that we're looking at these as one line of evidence, and we're not using these to, make any concrete decisions without any other evidence to support any conclusions that we're making. So these are just helping us better understand what's going on in each of these application areas.
But the data here is very consistent on this one. So let's go to the next one.
Yep. So this is SRE. You can see here we've got primarily the carboxylic acids. Again, those are on the right. PFHPA and PFOA were kind of the dominant compounds in these 2 locations.
So it's a very different signature we see here than we saw at the last one.
Right. If runway 24, if you remember, had PFOS in all of the locations.
And also remember that the location, if you can just go back quick, this is the location where the application area was a joint application with the town and the airport, and I believe it was the town truck that was used. So it's the town's formulation that was used at this location, which may explain why it's different.
Here we show both the Stroney lot and the runway 15 mid on the same figure here. And you can see it also, it looks a little bit scattered. You're seeing a little bit of the carboxylic acids, you're seeing some sulfonates. And then in the exceedance that we had over here at runway 15-1, it's only the carboxylic acids It's a little bit more scattered. South ramp at B. This one also similar to runway 24. We've got this nice consistent signature of PFOS in all of our locations. As Jim was saying, though, these were all pretty low concentrations, so take it with a grain of salt here. And we got the fuel farm. Fuel farm has some more interesting shapes, as you'll see. We've got some of these carboxylic acids showing up primarily, but we do have a pretty strong signature of PFOS here. And then a little bit of the PFH excess showing up in the tank area sample location.
I think the thing to note here is that you see that there's two graphs for the catch basin. So the upper radar plot is the sediment, right? And the lower one is the that's the sediment. So and you see that the sediment radar plot looks a lot like the soil plots that we saw, right? From 24 and what's the other one, the mid
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, 15. Yep, from 115.
Right. So yeah. So you're looking, you're seeing the signature for the sediment and the soil are very similar. And then if you zoom back out, if you look at just the water samples, look pretty close, right? If you look at the two samples that were collected from the containment areas, right? So that one, right, and one at the top, and then if you look at the sample from the catch basin water, those all look pretty similar. So that I think, again, it's at least that it's another line of evidence that our conceptual model is correct, that what we're seeing in the catch basin is the water that's being collected from the two containment areas and then pumped into the catch basin. So it kind of verifies that. I think, what you're seeing in Act 10, again, is also a pretty similar signature as well. It's in groundwater, it's down gradients, travel a little bit. So, you do get some decomposition of the compounds a little bit, but overall that signature is very similar as well. So again, this is one of the lines of evidence for our conceptual model for what's going on in this area.
South ramp at J. This is another area where, again, it was a joint training area, and you can see some different variations happening here with some of these different samples. If we go from, let's start at 1, you have this pretty dominant carboxylic acid signature. You have a little bit of the sulfonates showing up here. And as Jim was saying before, these are, concentrations that were relatively high, so you can have a pretty good level of confidence in the patterns that we're seeing here. SRJ4, a little bit different, although I think, this one you could probably say looks, not too dissimilar from this one over here. And then I think that the more unique thing here is SRJ2, where you have these kind of diamond shapes in the center, and then these, long lines that basically are PFOS and PFDA down here. So those are kind of interesting to see.
I think overall, what this shows us is that we've got a location where it was mixed use, right? It was airport use. It was also combined use over a period of time. So we got different products being used. There's a lot of mixing going on, I think, here. So this is why the radar plots for this location look more confused and don't really show a readily apparent pattern like we see at the other areas. So I think that's the takeaway for this one.
Yep. Sandpit, we see a similar situation where things are a little bit more wonky, I guess you could say. You have different signatures showing up from the same locations, from the same horizontal locations, not vertical. You do have some similarities here with PFOS being a dominant compound in some of the samples, but you also have really strong signatures from some of the carboxylic acids as well. So again, might just suggest some mixed use or different formulations of AFFF that were used in these areas.
We also know that this the sand pit was active for the longest period of time. So, and we know that the airport has used different foam products over the years. So, again, this is that kind of mixture of the different foam being applications over the years at this area. So this is kind of not unexpected, I think.
Right. And then runway 6 run up, which is like a poster child for what we're looking at.
Right. Right.
Pretty dominant with PFOS in every single graph that we have here. You do see little, tails of some different compounds showing up, but it's pretty consistent in this location.
Which
Does that
again,
make it easier or more difficult to remediate, or does it make a difference?
Really doesn't make a difference. It helps you with your conceptual model and understanding what's going on. But other than that, as far as remediation is concerned, really PFAS is PFAS.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For soil, anyway.
Right. And then this is the leasehold property. And so again, just kind of all over the map here as far as what we're seeing. And I think that just reiterates what we were talking about before when we were looking at the data directly, is that it's a mix of things happening here. And it's a jumble of different situations that we're going to have to tease out through additional delineation and work up here.
Yeah, we could talk about this location for another hour, which I'm sure no one wants. But what you've got here is variations between some of these are soil, some of these are water, which we've already kind of talked about that differential a little bit. And like Lisa said, there's some contribution from the car wash activities. There's also looks like some contribution from upgradient as well. So there's a lot going on here. It's going to take us a while to puzzle this all out.
One comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
I would just say at this location, Act 14 and 15 is typically where the surface water from the outfall pipe all accumulates.
Yeah.
So perhaps it isn't a contribution from the north, and maybe you've already caught that, but it really floods there pretty good sometimes.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur, for that. Yeah, we are aware of that, and that is a one thing that we are considering. Is that, yeah, we understand that the parking lot floods pretty good for the gas station, and there's the outfall, which basically drains that parking lot right out into that grassy area, which then flows to the east up, to the north of 14 and 15. So yeah, that's on our radar. No joke, pun intended there, on our radar, as something that we are gonna evaluate. But like I said, we need to do some sampling up gradient. I mean, if we do a line of grab samples in the middle of Monument Park and we don't find anything, that pretty much kind of leads us back to, like you said, to kind of that end around action going on with the runoff. Yep.
All right.
So we wanted to just, although this is part of our more recent work, we have evaluated the radar plots for the MVR area. And what we did is we tried to look at these, and because our conceptual model here is that, the contamination we're seeing on MVR, right, is coming from the different airport application areas. So what we're trying to do is try and trace these back, and see if we can identify, where I kind of think of the airport as kind of a jellyfish, and you've got these kind of tendrils that come off the jellyfish, which would be the plumes of PFAS coming down to the south and going towards the ocean. And then, when they cross MVR is where we're picking them up in the residential wells. So, looking at the radar plots here, if you look at the east end, the 5 radar plots that are in the blue circle, all have a pretty similar. And be careful not to. There's one from the orange that's kind of in that area, but those 5, they have a very similar signature. So that suggests to us that those are probably all coming from the same source, same application area. Same thing with the orange. You can see that there's 3 wells there, and those all have similar radar plots, and then the purple as well. So, and the purple, you can, if you also matches up, and really the purple and the orange aren't all that different. Again, you're looking at the sulfides, and that kind of matches up with what we see in Act 9, which is where Lisa's thing is now. So, again, we're starting to connect the dots here, and things are starting to make sense as we get more data coming in.
A little bit of a lag. Come back. All right.
This is the other end of MVR, and with the data plots as well. And you can kind of see that we tried to draw boxes around one that had similar radar plots. And what you can see is that it's a mess over there, right? You've got a lot of variability. These are all down gradient of the sandpit area. And when we looked at the sandpit area, you may remember that we saw a lot of variability there, which we attributed to the long use of foam applications in that area, and also the varying formulation of the foam that was used there. So I think that's what we're seeing in this area. So I think it's consistent with that. We're seeing a lot of variability in what we're seeing in the different residential wells, which relates back to the variability we're seeing at the sandpit, which is the source for this. So.
This one's scary.
This one we haven't figured out yet. We're still there's a lot of information on this.
This is,
go ahead.
sorry, I'll just orient everybody really quick. This is just the Nobadir Way area and the leasehold property, and then we included the monitoring wells that are up in this area too. But so you can see there's only from Evergreen Way north to the Nobadir Way properties that are included here. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that we're still trying to puzzle out some patterns here and what it all means. A lot of these concentrations are fairly low. So again, you got to take the radar plots with a grain of salt in those cases, because you don't have a strong signature, especially the further west you get. So that's something that to take into consideration as well. But that when you look at it, you can definitely see clusters that have very similar signatures. You look at the Evergreen Way area, in close to there's a bunch there. You go down to the left there, you can those radar plots all look very similar signature. Even up into there. So there's kind of different groupings. So we just got to try and puzzle out what that means and what those relate back to.
This is just the west, the additional west side properties. So everything south of Evergreen Way. And as Jim was mentioning, the further west you get, as we've talked about before, we're not sure what other potential sources might be of gradient of these locations as well. So, there could be some other factors that, change these shapes as you move west. Ooh, and then we get into timeline. I know you guys wanted to talk about timeline. Before we do that though, are there any other questions for the radar plots?
Well, the data in general.
Yeah.
I think most of us are bleary-eyed looking at those.
Sorry.
Probably ought to move on to the timeline.
I know. Sorry, guys.
It's cool if you're a scientist.
Yeah.
Sure.
They kind of geek out over it. Yeah, so we wanted to just give you guys an update on where we are within the timeline. This, I believe you have all seen this before. I highlighted here the phase that we're in now, which is our comprehensive response action phase. So we've completed everything to the left of that and are able to move on to this, what is the phase 2 comprehensive site assessment. And we have an additional 3 years to complete this work. Again, taking into account some of the work that we'll be doing on a faster pace for the Taxiway Echo project.
So the yellow, which was the preliminary response actions, or the PRAs, or the immediate, the IRAs that we've been doing the reports. That's all kind of immediate response stuff where you're identifying risks and mitigating those risks, where we were sampling the residential wells and making sure that everyone was provided with bottled water or POET systems, and mitigating the risk, and also just doing a kind of a high level look at the source areas, at the application areas, to see if they were sources as directed by Mass DEP. So that's all done now. We've done that. We've made sure that there are no ongoing risks from the site. And now we're in the, again, like comprehensive response actions, where this is where we have to define the extent of the contamination in soil and groundwater on the airport, and related to the airport, and get that figured out. Like Lisa said, we've got 3 years to do that. So, which sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not, because we've got, we're trying to adjust our investigation so that they are focused more on the spring and the fall seasons, which is a good time to get equipment on the ferry and do the work, and not run into kind of the summer. You're not in the dead of winter, and you're not in the summer rush. So that we're trying to lay out our schedule to focus on spring and fall, to get and that works out well, because it gives us time in between the different phases to evaluate the data and decide where we need to go next. But that's going to be our focus, is doing soil and groundwater sampling on the airport for the next couple of years, probably.
Right. Yeah. So this is our potential schedule here. Starts in July 2020 on this page, ends in June 2021, and then the next page starts up in July 2021. So what you see here, these X's where we've completed specific tasks, indicated here on the left, and we've included the associated contract numbers as well, and identified whether or not we are within the MCP phase 1 and phase 2 project as well. So some of the tasks, some of the on-site not soil delineation, that's the wrong term to use, but the source soil investigation, those are part of phase 2, even though we did them as part of the phase, the first phase of work. Yeah. And then we'll be doing some additional work here. The lighter blue color indicates that it's, planning, preparation, and, if we're able, the tentative schedule for actually completing some of these activities. And then the dark blue is a semi-firm schedule that you'll see, down here, where we've got, Matacasham ongoing work is happening. So that's blue, because we know that that's, it's set in stone, basically. Community relations kind of always happens. And then we have some investigation happening at the fuel farm, and some taxiway echo work later on in the year here. And then we move into, again, this is July 2021 to June 2022. This hatch mark here indicates that was done in the prior year. So we don't need to really look at this stuff anymore. And we're really getting into this on and off site groundwater plume delineation in 2021 and 2022. And hopefully we'll be wrapped up with the soil delineation by then. And then I also included the water line installation. And talking with Rich, this was just kind of a time frame that we felt comfortable with, depending on the bid process and all of that. And once we have that water line installed, we have the cessation of the O&M of the POET systems, which would be great. So then that's represented here as well. So kind of a big picture. Hopefully that's helpful for you all to understand where we are and where we're going.
Very helpful. Thank you. It's very thorough. And slightly mind-bending.
Yeah. It is almost 7 o'clock.
No, but I do appreciate the effort that you all have put into this. And I think you've made it, at least from my perspective, as clear as you can. And I want to echo Arthur's comments earlier about the good work that you all are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yes. Is Mass DEP require us to remediate all this soil, despite the fact that we're going to fix all the water problem? by the installation of Wannacomet water, but I mean, are we required to remediate all this soil? In other words, dig up the island and bring in new soil?
Well, remediation is required because the aquifer on Nantucket is what's considered a sole source aquifer. So even though we're supplying water, the objective is still to clean up the aquifer and restore the aquifer for future generations and future use. So the answer is yes. Now, or partially the answer is yes, that remediation is required. Now, whether that means digging up all the soil, that's a different story. We are working with them to evaluate options. I mean, one thing we don't want to do here is dig up all the soil, truck it off to the mainland, and bring in new soil and fill in the hole. I mean, that was going to be extremely expensive. The other thing is that right now there's no facility that will take soil with PFAS in it, and that's because nobody knows what to do with PFAS. Nobody knows where it's going, where the regulations are going. So all of these facilities that take contaminated soil, nobody wants to touch PFAS because nobody knows where it's going. So right now there is no option for that. So I think we've been working with MJ. MJ's got some really good engineering solutions that they're considering, and our hope is that we can come up with a solution where we can come up with a system where we're essentially isolating the impacted soil. And again, our preliminary discussions with Mass DEP suggest that they may be on board with that. There's also some new technologies that are coming out all the time and being tested. So, we're going to keep an eye. I mean, it's going to be, if you again look at our timeline, we've got the next couple of years, we're going to be doing the evaluations, and then the phase 3 is the remedial action plan. That's where we look at the different technologies that are available and kind of decide which one is the best one. So, we've got in the next 3 years, there's going to be a lot of work that's being done on PFAS. And there's a lot of sites that have contamination. So there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to invent ways and test new ways to treat this stuff economically. So I think there's going to be a lot more options by the time we get to the phase 3.
Yeah.
One more question. It seems to me there are only about 1 or 2 places where you have PFAS contamination at depth. Most of the PFAS contamination in the soil seems to be 1 or 2 feet. I don't see we're going to be doing anything about that.
Yeah, if we do have exceedances, it's probably going to be cost effective to just scrape that stuff off and take it over to one of the other areas, and then deal with it there. I think that's what we're kind of and we're pontificating here a little bit, but one of the ideas that we talked about with regard to the taxiway echo work at runway 6 run up is removing some of the hot spots there, some of the higher level of contamination there, and bringing them over to the sandpit area where we know we've got high concentrations as well in soil. Because one of the there's a provision in the MCP called the non-degradation provision, and that means that you can't make things worse. So I can't take soil from, say, run up 6 area and take it over to the fuel farm, an area that's less contaminated. So it's probably not a good example because it's different, but
SRE is a good example.
SRE is a good example. Exactly right. We wouldn't take it over there. It's got to go to another location that's either as contaminated or more contaminated to comply with that policy. So that that's the sandpit area is a good location for that because it is the most highly contaminated location. Again, this is all very preliminary. This is all based on data that we have now, which is preliminary. But that's kind of some of the things that we're thinking about, and we're having initial discussions with Mass DEP about.
Okay, you answered it.
All right. Anybody else? Mr. Gasparo, Ms. Flanzer, Ms. Topham?
I would just like to echo yours and Arthur's, Mr. Gasparo's comments. I thought it was very thorough. It looked very overwhelming when I looked at it on the screen before we had our meeting, and I appreciate all your hard work and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr.
Great.
Chairman,
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, you also have a raised hand.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Mr. Sadlowski?
Hi, this is Tom Yes, Tom Sidlowski again. I just have a quick question. I tried to get in earlier, but so it's for either Jim or Lisa. On the ground testing you did, not the groundwater testing, at the South Ramp at J, it was a little more concerning than some of the other areas. And I was wondering if you know whether that groundwater could run off to the west where the residential properties are. And the second question is, have you had any groundwater tests at that location? You might have done that at prior meetings, so I apologize for that. But have you done groundwater tests around that to find out if these soil samples have actually added PFAS to the groundwater at that location?
Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I was on mute. I had to click it off. I had to find the mute button. Yeah, so I guess to answer your first question, yes, well, maybe not your first question, one of your questions. We do intend to do additional testing of the groundwater in this area. We have not tested the groundwater in this area to date. There are no monitoring wells in this location, and we haven't done any groundwater grab samples. But that's next on our list, or one of the next things on our list is to evaluate that. So we don't know to the extent if this stuff has actually made it down to the water table or not. With regard to groundwater running off from this area, the groundwater flow is very consistently to the south, more or less parallel to the taxiway. So yeah, so it kind of goes down that way. So any contamination from this area. Sorry,
I wasn't clear. I meant surface water. I'm sorry, I said groundwater. I meant surface water based on the way the land is shaped.
Lisa, do you want to go into this? I know you've got the. I know we had a map that had the arrow on it.
Because we get a lot of flooding on Monahans right at that gate. So I'm wondering if that water is running into the properties.
Yeah, you're talking about this area right here, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
right
I guess our understanding of the hydraulics, and again, this is something that we're still looking at, but our understanding of hydraulics is that there's so there's kind of the access road that you can see there, right off the corner of the, right, exactly, it runs right through there. So there's a culvert that runs under that access road, and the low spot is kind of exactly where Lisa's showing her, that's where all the water drains. The water drains from there. So any water that's over by, for example, SRJ-1, that's there, that flows down into a low spot that's right in there and then flows through the culvert and then off onto the airport property. So it's our understanding at this point, and certainly we need to do more evaluation in this area, but it's our understanding that the water that's ponding on the road there, that all kind of drains down onto the airport property and then through that culvert and out into the that kind of vegetated area there. So the flow is more onto the airport than off the airport.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, anybody else on this?
Just to that point in that one area, I do believe that there has been a situation in the last couple of years in that corner where there has been drainage, surface flow that is contributing, partially off of the airport. So I think when we did our stormwater, when we did our stormwater study, the consultants couldn't find the drainage structures in that area. And now, of course, it's all been modified because it's the access and haul road. But, certainly the flooding has been exacerbated at that location in the last couple of years.
Well, you're gonna look into that, Mr. Sukup, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's certainly we need to understand the hydraulics in this area, as well as doing additional soil. I mean, the soil and groundwater sampling will tell us what the extent of the contamination is, and that's certainly our job or an objective in going forward is to identify where that is. So we'll track it if it runs off the airport property there. But part of that will be understanding the surface hydraulics and putting together a conceptual model for how the water is moving through that area. And if adjustments need to be made there to the surface water drainage, maybe we need a bigger culvert through that haul road so that water drains more easily down into that wetland area. That may be something that we recommend as part of this is, increase that drainage.
All right, thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Moving on, we've got a couple of other things we need to spend some time on. The town meeting warrant article quickly, Mr. Rafter.
We have two of them on the warrant article. One is the extension of the term for hangars up to a 40-year development period. And I briefed the town real estate specialist on that today. The second is the warrant article for car rentals. And today at the FinCom meeting, it was voted unanimously not to adopt that warrant article. So that's position on that from FinCom.
Okay, thank you. The draft response to the MIPA certificate for the EIR.
I believe Jed is with us, yes, Jed Merrow, and he's going to go through hopefully a summary of our response to the comments that we received on the MIPA certificate.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'm just wondering, other Weston staff people, maybe, I don't know if they're needed
they
anymore.
may be excused if they would like to be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will drop off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you,
good night.
Katie. Go ahead, Jed.
Yeah, so would you like me to walk you through the memo or take questions on it, or how would you like to proceed?
What's the preference of the commission? I'm happy with your, sort of hitting any high points and then letting people ask questions if everybody else is agreeable to that.
Agree.
That sounds good.
Okay. I guess we've lost Ms. Planzer. All right, go ahead.
So why don't I share my screen? If I can find the right document to share. Here we go. Let me know if you can see this.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we had some discussions with VHB and the airport, reviewed all the comments and also the MIPA certificate, which has a scope of what they would like to see in the final EIR. The rare species comment was primarily that we should have more detail on specific mitigation options, mitigation sites if possible, and should be on island would be the preferred. And we should consult with local organizations about potential mitigation sites. We believe that it's going to be challenging to come up with specific mitigation sites and a specific mitigation package before the final EIR needs to be produced, but we are going to make a good faith effort to do that. We'll contact the local organizations, Land Council, Conservation Foundation, Land Bank, and see what their ideas are and come up with some concepts. We'll continue to coordinate with Natural Heritage. They're the ones who really need to satisfy on this, and see where that leads as far as the FEIR goes. I think that the investigation and the conversation is going to continue into the beyond the FEIR stage and into the permitting stage. After the FEIR is completed, we will be seeking a conservation and management permit from Natural Heritage for clearance under the Mass Endangered Species Act. So I know there's interest in keeping mitigation on island, but there's fairly substantial impacts with the projects, including takings of rare species, and we think it would be premature to presuppose any particular solution. It might end up being some habitat management, some purchasing some conservation land, some in lieu fee. There might be some combination of measures that would satisfy the mitigation.
But what is the harm of saying that we would prefer to have the mitigation on island?
There's no harm in that, and that is our preference. And I think, that I don't know what we say here in terms of the commitment. The airport will state that keeping mitigation on island is the preferred mitigation solution,
Mhm.
but no options will be excluded at this point.
That's not in here now, is it?
This phrase that I just highlighted here, the airport will state that keeping mitigation on island is the preferred mitigation solution.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Any comments or questions before we
No,
go on?
keep going.
Okay. Noise and air quality. The FEIR should include a more detailed description of aircraft operations, and we can provide more detail on taxiing procedures, clearances, how the safety checks work, idling requirements of the airplanes, and what things are within the airport's control to regulate in terms of aircraft activities and what things are not, beyond their control. And evaluate air emissions and noise generated by these activities. Review the noise mitigation alternatives for the South Apron, including a noise wall, a noise berm, use of GPUs. So we propose developing a quantitative noise model, combining the berm with GPUs and a noise barrier with GPUs. And this is sort of an extension of the noise study that VHB prepared previously of the effects of the noise berm. We don't think that a quantitative analysis of air emissions will produce any useful results. So they would be very expensive and it would not produce useful results. And we propose qualitatively describing how earthen berms might affect air quality in the area.
All right. I see there's a hand up in the public. This is probably a good point to pause. Mr. Sidlowski, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Well, I just had a comment on this, noticing it's really about this aspect of the thing that we do believe that the berm is necessary, and I know it's a point of contention. And the other comment I want to make is looking a little later in the package at the email chain. I was a bit concerned with Mr. Carberg's comment to the effect that you might park large commercial planes on the new South Apron in effect to offset complaints, as he said, that the apron is a parking lot for the 1%. We would prefer not to have large airplanes parked on that apron, commercial planes, if we can. And I don't think parking them there is really going to change the public's perception. People who have that perception aren't going to be changed anyway. So we would prefer you try whenever you can to keep the large planes over toward the terminal. Thank you. That's all I have for today.
Thank you. Mr. Gasparo, did you want to make a comment?
Sure. Do you want to let Jed finish, or do you want me to?
Well, I think we should, I know you have a specific concern in this area, so we should probably.
Sure. So I guess if we could just go back to the previous one about the rare species, and after the language that he highlighted, I have concern with keeping in there that no options will be categorically excluded for consideration at this point. I think that the commission should consider at this point excluding off-island mitigation and make it that we have to figure out how to do this so that we're not set, that we're not open to essentially the other option means that you would be looking at, putting resources from Nantucket and Nantucket Airport towards off-island solutions. And I think you could keep what you have as highlighted, but I would think that the second part of that sentence could be excluded.
Well, the regulatory body is Natural Heritage, and they're looking at it on a statewide basis, and they're concerned with net benefit to particular species on a statewide basis. So they won't necessarily, being on island won't necessarily be a requirement. It'd be a preference for them as well. But they're concerned about the species and the habitats wherever they can be protected and however they can be protected. That doesn't mean the
potential FAA issue here with respect to sending.
There's a potential issue in terms of what FAA would be willing to fund. If you
well, it's not just funding, but it's the question of revenue. Sending airport revenues off island.
Yeah, the value, I think, is the issue. If it's $1 million an acre here versus 50,000 on the mainland, that's going to create a revenue issue, diversion issue. And I'm exaggerating, but it's that type of thing that I think they'd be concerned with.
Yeah, you might find it more cost-effective mitigation elsewhere.
No
Well,
doubt.
but if the FAA says no, then we don't have a choice.
Yeah, but I think Commissioner Gasparo was simply saying, could we, and correct me if I'm wrong, just remove that last section that's not highlighted, however, no options be categorically excluded. Would there be a harm in removing that?
Well, are we then categorically excluding?
No, we're just saying we're
Stating a preference.
You say the airport, we're stating a preference and leaving it at that. I think if Mr. Gasparo had his way, he'd prefer it said definitely we would not consider off-island mitigation, but it seems to me that leaving it this way for the moment is a reasonable approach with that last phrase removed.
So just delete that phrase. Is that what we're?
Are you partly happy with that, Mr. Gasparo?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Everybody else, Mr. Buscarin? All right with you?
Agree.
Ms. Topham?
Fine with
Oh, I
me.
see.
Okay.
Okay.
And then to this point, if I just had a question through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Morrow, what is the timing for the submission of the EIR? Of getting through all of, I know you're going to respond, but essentially doing everything that you've talked about here. What is your regulatory time or expected timeline?
Well, there's no hard and fast deadline. It's being driven by the FAA grant application deadline of May 1st. We're trying to get a grant application in by May 1st for the permitting phase of the project, and we'd like to have the FAIR completed by that time. So what we're looking at is completing the FAIR over, say, the next month or so, and then getting it out by maybe by May 1st, end of April, something like that. Then we get our grant application in. We'd have a pretty good idea of what we'd be looking at for mitigation and so forth. And begin the permitting process sometime after that.
Seems aggressive, but Okay. Do you want me to-
You're gonna come back to us in April for the final approval on this, right?
Correct. That's the idea. Yep.
So if I may then, Mr. Chair, moving on to, I think with the, probably much of the discussion and the main concern and the issues that I raised to both you and to staff were related to the South Apron expansion. And, we've spent years of master planning and meetings and discussions, and I didn't recall, any previous presentations or discussions related to the relocation of commercial large jet carriers to the south ramp. And I think that constitutes a fairly major change, and that the ramp, I understand the ramp size has been reduced, but the fact that this one parking location that's shown on the plan, perhaps we could scroll down to in the packet, that slide, I think that would be helpful. I'm not sure who.
I can stop sharing.
It's in the packet. It's page 194.
I mean, I can do it if you'd like.
What, I just want to make sure I can do it, Arthur. I just want to make sure I know which,
Page
It's
one.
you're talking about the picture.
Yeah.
The drawing showing the airplane.
Drawing showing the aircraft, because I think this is,
Okay,
really gets to the discussion.
hold on one sec. That's what you're looking for, right?
Yeah. Can you turn it 90? And enlarge it. I mean, I have it ready to go if you'd like.
Yeah, why don't you put it up?
You have to stop. Okay. So there you go. So the concern that I have is this one little piece right in, I don't know if my pointer is visible as well, but in here.
It is, yes.
And that, this parking spot here is designed for an Airbus A220, extremely, it's a full commercial airliner. And I honestly hadn't caught that in any of the, perhaps that's my mistake, in any of the previous presentations. And I don't believe that that's been a historical use on the south ramp. And I also noticed the way that it's designed essentially is that it, could power out and come back around here. And you could see that there is no room for the noise barrier, in this area as well. You could see how close, if this jet was to turn around, it's within 60 feet, maybe 70 feet of the road, and then all your residential properties. So this piece of things is specific to what I was hoping could be looked at closer as part of the FEIR, and as well as have the commission have a discussion and perhaps for a future agenda item as to, if commercial operations are going to be moved to this area by a matter of necessity and through the management, that there is a discussion at a commission level about how those operations, what the expectations might be, what the policies and procedures might be, in terms of understanding safety comes first, but that we could start to have some discussion whether, the tow in and tow out and limited use, perhaps it's only a storage or a, it's not a spot that then can morph into additional loading and, turnaround where the jet is sitting essentially waiting for passengers there. I think there's a lot to discuss when we talk about such a large operational change to the historical use of Nantucket Airport, where, these carriers have been by the terminal and the north ramp, to then move them down here, and especially have, that area that it is so close to, the residential areas, with no area there for the mitigation, unless we look at perhaps a noise wall instead of the berm. The other piece that I raised is that it's a little hard to see on this, but this area here is really the only priority habitat, right? It's 0.32 acres. It's not that this whole berm and then this area over in here is all priority habitat as well. So if you were to remove this area from the project, you essentially would net out having the berm. And we've had a lot of discussion about how the berm triggered an additional regulatory threshold for mitigation, which is what caused so much of the additional expense here. And I know that, the commission has made decisions and we've had discussions in terms of, the funding of the berm. But I do think that recognizing right now at this point in time, this is so critical as we're preparing the FEIR. This is the time. There were comments raised from, the Surfside Association, as well as some of the neighbors that do have concerns. And maybe we do need to study whether or not an alternative type of, barrier is in fact, if the impact due to mitigation because of rare species over such a large footprint, if instead a wall or a barrier of some sort as shown on the ALP would be preferred. This is the time I really think that we have to dig in and try to figure this out. I think as well in terms of the response, I'm not sure that these impacts have been fully quantified. And that's sort of what I read in their certificate is that it may be exactly what you're proposing to do, Mr. Morrow, in terms of further investigation and explaining these. But when you tell me this is all going to be done in a month, I'm a bit concerned as well. And hopefully you can put the resources to it, but I don't want to see that it's just, I hope that there are actual, alternatives and solutions that are fixes that could be looked at here to mitigate what I see as, not only a pretty significant impact as a result of the change in operations to have commercial operations in this area, and then the noise that may be generated from them. I realize that these are the latest, stage 3 and newest type aircrafts, but if they're sitting there running with GPUs and or preconditioned air, waiting for passengers, things like that, and that hasn't been sort of considered, then I think that's something that we have to really look at. And I think that the community as well is going to be fairly surprised when they, with the change and seeing that size of an aircraft parked in this area. So I know that was a lot, but I do hope that we can find a way forward to continue to work on this and not rush it, and perhaps consider some slight tweaks that might help mitigate impact to the community. Thank you.
Mr. Rafter?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I hear this reference to a change, and to the best of my knowledge, this has been in here for at least a year, possibly longer. And we're trying to put 15 pounds in a 5-pound bag, and this is going to give us a little bit of relief on the north side. But don't forget also, although very infrequently, we have had much larger airplanes in that area. We've had C-17s, we've had 757s, we've had MD-80s, we've had 737s, all at various times, whether they be charters, VIPs, whatever. So it's not a brand new scheme, if you will, in terms of parking big airplanes down this area. But we need some relief from the limited space on the other side. Unfortunately, whoever planned the terminal elected to put it in the wrong place, where it should have been out in the parking lot and given us more room on our commercial apron. But it's something we have to deal with. This is scaled way back over what was in the master plan. So from an operational perspective, we're getting crunched here. This is designed to accommodate traffic from 2 to 3 years ago, not going forward. So operationally, this is desperately needed, and it's a scaled down version of what was desperately needed. So for what it's worth, that's the operational aspect of it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I had one additional question through you.
Yes, sir.
To Mr. Lasden, I think, and perhaps also Mr. Rafter. But, you know, where the screen shows here and this extra bit of pavement, could this be made to work without that? You know, in other words, without this jet having to power back around by, you know, using a tow in and tow out the way all of the other jets
If I
are set
may,
up? I mean, would it be a major
you need that for the tow vehicle.
from the front?
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
wouldn't anticipate a taxi out of that position. A power out there would blast things that we wouldn't want.
All right, I'll stop sharing now. And
I would not anticipate any power out on that. That would be a hazardous situation, I think, because you have debris and everything else that would blow across the road too. So, but I think that area, what it's really needed for is the actual tow, to tow it around.
Do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Laston?
Other than I would say that to reflect Tom's point, yes, we did spend a lot of time trying to lay out this south apron sizing based on one of the early comments from the FAA was that the airport had been traditionally, unfortunately, parking aircraft on the crosswind runway and also on the runway 6 run-up pad. So the apron here is really sized just to take into account those planes. And the A220 is a new plane, although it has been talked around. I think it's been a year that we've identified that plane because one of your aircraft carriers has identified the use of the A220 in the future. They are phasing out the E190 and going to the A220. So the idea was to be able to provide a parking plane for what your airlines have told you they will be parking here overnight, possibly. So that's where the size of that spot came in. It was limited to just one spot because the idea is that, you know, it would be an emergency spot if we had more than 6 that you can possibly park at the ramp and we needed an extra spot. So that was the basis on how we came up with the size of the ramp.
I think it's important to note that we heard Mr. Sidlowski's comment.
Yep.
About the berm and about the parking space. But having said that, I'm going to ask Mr. Buscarin and Ms. Topham how they feel about continuing to address this issue.
Well,
Go ahead.
you go ahead.
As you know, Mr. Rafter knows, I have a granddaughter who was involved in airfield design. She mentioned to me, and I don't know anything about this or much about it, jet blast ramp, which we would put over on the north ramp. And it would alleviate the smell and also the noise of jets. Now, I did get a quick tutorial from Patrick and showing me what it's like. It's not pretty, but you can do it with wood and shingles and stuff to make it look more aesthetic, I guess. So I don't know. Does anybody want to know anything about that or answer me on that, please?
Well, I think while the berm, we haven't committed to the berm is in the drawing, but if there are alternate relatively cost-effective ways of doing the same thing, I think we'd be open to them.
It sounds like what Commissioner Topham may be describing is a jet blast wall.
Yes.
Which you've seen at places like Kennedy and things where they may be powering around and you're trying to, it's not as much as noise containment as the blast itself. It does do something for noise, but it's certainly not, you know, going to be as strong, if you will, as a noise wall for noise. So.
But we have the option, do we not, Mr. Rafter and Mr. Lasden, of considering alternatives to the berm still going forward?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as we learn more about the environmental, we have to seriously consider whether it's a cost benefit type, you know. My understanding is the walls are very expensive, but they're very effective as opposed to a berm. But as you know, if you start adding on to a berm, a cost for mitigation and so on and so forth, and the cost skyrockets, then you might be getting closer to a wall. That's just I don't know
Yeah, we don't know. We don't have enough information at this point. Yes,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, Jed, if you could just discuss a little bit more the amount of mitigation. It wasn't based specifically on priority habitat, right? It was based on,
the noise, basically.
no, I was talking about the tree clearing for the berm and the threshold.
Yeah, Rich is talking about the habitat mitigation. So once you are impacting priority habitat on the airport, natural heritage regulates impacts to all types of all similar habitat on the airport. So they don't give us a free pass for the portions of the berm that are not priority habitat. They're counting those in the habitat that we need to mitigate for. So the fact that just a portion of it is priority habitat doesn't really help us that much because we're already into priority habitat on several other projects, including the apron expansion and the berm. So we're mitigating for that whole swath of habitat regardless of how much priority habitat we're impacting in that one location.
Ms. Topham, did you have another comment relevant to my question?
Well, I was wondering if FAA would be more apt to reimburse us for this ramp, seeing as how it's a piece of equipment, but I don't know, rather than the berm. I have no idea.
Well, they're reimbursing us for the ramp anyway. The berm, they've indicated they don't want to at this point, and I presume their answer would be the same with a wall, but I don't know.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Lassen.
So, Ms. Topham, yes, the FAA has told us pretty forcefully that the berm is not eligible for federal money, and the state has taken a similar stance. So at this point in time, neither the state nor the feds will pay for the berm. And
Would there be a different answer for a wall?
I don't believe so. They were looking at it as noise. The challenge that we're having is the FAA has a noise model that they use, and the noise model is based on an average annualized noise. And they have a nationwide program using that model. And unfortunately, we only sort of trip the noise a couple of weeks in the summer. So when you average annualize it over the entire year, we don't come close to meeting their criteria. And so they are falling back on that criteria because it's a nationwide program, and they're not going to change their nationwide sort of noise strategy model and open themselves up to many other airports.
That was their same logic for denying a Vail grant previously for electrifying the ramp.
Correct. And so they use this nationwide model. And as we've been sort of digging into this to try to understand, the state doesn't have a noise threshold. So the state was falling back on the federal threshold. So when and if we did further noise studies, there's no threshold for us to sort of compare it to that we can make a case with.
All right. Thank you. Again, Ms. Topham, is this an issue you want to continue to pursue?
I'd
Or
like to know how much it cost and what would really be involved, and see if we can compare it to the berm. And I just thought maybe they would.
We don't have to decide. We're not deciding on the berm per se tonight.
Right.
Because that's coming up again in the future. And I think we would be well advised to consider other options at the time. If we decide to go forward with some kind of noise mitigation there, we'd be smart to look at the options before we make a final decision.
Thank you.
Mr. Buscarin?
I think we need to commit to this, and if we can decide about the wall and the berm later, that's fine. But I think we need to move ahead with regard to getting this submitted to the FAA and not discuss it further.
I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Buscarin. I'm not sure exactly where you are, Ms. Topham.
I'm fine with that for now.
Okay. Unless you would prefer that we take a vote, Mr. Gasparo, we'll go forward.
No, I guess I was just looking for clarity when through you when you said commit, you mean commit to the plan that's on the table was the reference,
Yes,
meaning not a commitment to the berm.
that's correct.
So not to
I
belabor
mean, basically, it's a commitment to this response to the EAEIR.
So my last piece, I guess, would say is while we're under contract with professionals who are working on, what they've stated in the draft, I think just trying to anything that we could do using those resources of these professionals to develop strategies to help the staff and, sort of what you outlined in the comments would be, I'm not sure how far you intend to take those. If we go back to the comment, the draft comment in terms of GPU idling, what is the plan to address those, I guess is the
I think
question.
that's a good question.
Shall I share my screen? Back to the comments and responses.
Sure.
Okay, where did it go? It's disappeared. Oh, show all windows. Okay, no. Here we go. Okay. So the FAR should provide a more detailed description of aircraft operations on the expanded South Apron. We talked about that and how we talk about idling and taxiing and so forth. Run-ups, safety checks. Evaluate air emissions and noise generated by these activities. And we talked about how we plan to develop a quantitative noise model, combination of the berm with GPUs and a noise barrier with GPUs to build upon the previous study. But for air emissions, we would describe that qualitatively.
I think if I understood him correctly, I think what Mr. Gasparo was asking is as part of this process at the end of the day, handing over to the airport as sort of a blueprint for how it implements this. Is that correct, Mr. Gasparo?
Yes, thank you. And back to the paragraph, you make these statements and I'm just wondering exactly that. What is the product that you provide in terms of, I can't read it right now because you're scrolled up, but those the factors that you mentioned.
So in terms of the aircraft operations, the product will be more detail in the narrative sections of the environmental impact report, where we describe the alternatives probably and how they work.
But I think what Mr. Gasparo is looking for, and I agree with him, is we're looking for something that basically is a handbook of some kind on how to implement this.
How to implement what?
The recommendations of the EAEIR.
If I may, how exactly that? How the idling GPU, APU use, would be implemented such that you don't have the environmental impacts, right? In other words, it's one thing to just make the statements, but in fact, how do you say this, and it has to obviously have flexibility. The manager's going to run the airport at the end of the day, but as a guide that perhaps.
Maybe if I may, excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Gasparo, in the interest of time, maybe this is something that Mr. Rafter and Mr. Lasden and perhaps you and I can talk about offline and come back with something to the commission and as part of the discussion in April.
Yeah, Dan, I agree. I think what we're looking for is an operational plan for the South Apron, how it will operate.
Right.
Parameters, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how are we gonna, tow in, tow out, use of GPU, whatever it may be, and identify as much as we can in a framework that how that's going to be managed or operated. Is that kind of getting close to where we want to be?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay.
And if I may, I think that would really help support the FEIR and be very responsive to the comments.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, I'm done.
And we can make commitments in the FEIR, and we take our direction from you folks. So we should be able to do something that would
We'll have
satisfy
operating
that.
guidelines or something for it, but I have an idea of what we can do.
Okay. So the next comment is it should evaluate the feasibility of an alternate location for airplane parking that is farther away from residential areas, such as the area north of the terminal building. And here we're proposing a sort of fatal flaws analysis. We've looked at some previous studies that have been done, for example, in the bunker area on the northeastern portion of airport property. Was looked at in the past for a sort of generic aviation related land use. They didn't talk about an apron specifically, and they didn't do any detailed study of what the impacts would be. But that area is an area of land that's on airport property. It probably wouldn't work because it would be far from all the other operations on the airport, require more aircraft travel to get back there, require a lot more taxiway pavement, be very expensive to put something there. So we're looking at some kind of fatal flaws analysis, not a detailed design effort that would design several different aprons, but would just look at the feasibility of other locations. And based on a cursory look, it seems highly unlikely that there will be other locations. If it does turn out there are other locations that seem like they're feasible, well, then we'd have to sort of put the brakes on and go back to you folks and the FAA and MassDOT and decide what the next steps are. Do we want to do some more detailed study, or can we all agree that these locations do not need to be studied in more detail?
I just foresee that location to the east would really, we get into the whole issue we got into I don't think you were part of the discussion, but when we discussed the extra taxiway for runway 33, the safety people at the FAA would come into this discussion, I think. And as you say, it will require a lot more pavement, which will have problems of its own. My preference would be to just let it go for now.
We have to make some good faith effort to look at alternative locations in order to meet the MEPA certificate scope. But
Right.
we
Well,
think that
if your approach makes sense, then go for it.
okay. It's not going to be a detailed study. It's more of a fatal flaws overview. Hazardous waste, I don't know if we need to talk about this. They're just looking for an update and more information as it becomes available. And we would provide that information for them as it becomes available, to the extent that it's available. There is a few comments related to climate change, using sea level projections, describe the planning process for the potential runway relocation, including specific monitoring protocols, erosion setback limits, and triggers for further analysis. So we'll have to look into sea level rise scenarios, for example, and flood inundation, but we don't really think that's much of an issue for the airport. We think that issue can be dispatched fairly easily. The big issue is the coastal erosion, as you all know. And in the FEIR, we would propose some sort of monitoring protocol where the airport would monitor probably on an annual basis coastal erosion and determine what thresholds would trigger the need for action, either in terms of the safety area, the localizer, the runway itself, that sort of thing. But mainly just setting up a monitoring protocol at this point.
Yeah, I think it's got to be done annually, given the kind of erosion that's been going along parts of the South Shore this winter.
Was there quite a bit of erosion?
There was one weekend about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, where 20 feet disappeared.
Wow.
Okay.
Updated information from the coastal risk flood model, the coastal flood risk model. That's not publicly released yet, but we'll use the information to the extent that it's available. That's no big deal. Identify the useful life of the project and how project components, including runways, will be designed to meet future climate conditions based on sea level rise and inundation. We talked about that. I don't think that's going to be a big deal considering how high up the airport is above the ocean. Consult with CZM in developing the protocol, the monitoring protocol. That's not a problem. Design its drainage systems with sufficient capacity to ensure that runoff can be collected and managed under more frequent and intense storms. So we followed the latest state guidelines in designing the stormwater system. We don't think that the rainfall projections are going to change that much within the design life of the proposed project, but we are going to look at the rainfall intensity projections and look at how it would affect the stormwater system. We don't propose redesigning the stormwater system. We don't think that's going to be necessary. Review reports of flooding near its gate on Monahans Road. So
we've talked about that already.
We've talked about that already. Yep, you guys have that underway. Provide an update on mitigation commitments relative to the tree clearing to be undertaken by the project. This is mainly a carbon loss issue, and we will look at mitigation options for the loss of carbon sinks and carbon sequestration due to the tree clearing, which might be plantings. You know, this is not a detailed analysis. This is more like a general review of what the options are. And then there were a number of public comments, and most of them reiterated comments that we've talked about already. A lot of noise and air pollution comments. We talked about that. The need for the high-speed taxiway, the need to retain runway 1230, those were already addressed, and we'll reiterate the responses to those. There were comments about the noise abatement policy being ineffective, and we'll describe that in a little more detail in the FEIR, exactly what it is. Flooding on Monahans again. Light pollution. We'll mention that the airport passed a lighting policy and what that states. Concerns about PFAS, and as we talked about that already. Marine fisheries is concerned about indirect impacts of PFAS on the marine food web. And I think all we need to do is talk about how we're managing PFAS. We're not going to be increasing PFAS releases. These projects are not going to be increased PFAS releases to the marine food web. I think that's all we need to demonstrate. Dunes on the vehicles on the beach, and not really our issue. Rare species, coastal erosion. Some of these comments are pretty general. Mass DEP, they wanted a soil management plan prior to construction, and we can commit to that. They cited the air pollution regulations and recommended ceasing idling until takeoff and using plug-in units. They said the airport should provide DEP an analysis of alternatives to idling to address greenhouse gases and air quality in general and noise. And we talked about how air and noise would be addressed, including discussion of operations and idling. So I think we'll be addressing that comment. Aircraft firefighting foam. Best practices for stormwater operations maintenance plan. We won't provide that in the FEIR, but we will commit to it before construction. PFAS again. They requested a formal analysis of greenhouse gas emissions of air traffic and vehicular traffic. And we're not really affecting air operations, so we don't think it's necessary to do that. And if anything, there'll be a reduction in vehicle travel with the crew quarters close to the airport, for example. So we don't think it's necessary to do that kind of analysis. And the MEPA certificate didn't ask for it. There were concerns about in lieu fee mitigation and off-island mitigation. We discussed that at some length. Preferences for on-island mitigation. And they said the noise berm area is potential northern long-eared bat habitat. That's a federally threatened species. And the airport should conduct acoustic surveys and discussions with airport staff. They're willing to do that. We don't see any downside in determining whether bats are present. We think it's unlikely because Natural Heritage didn't flag this issue. And then the Natural Heritage comments, Fish and Wildlife. They describe the performance standards that must be met, which we understand and we accept. The Department of Energy Resources recommends committing to a higher level of energy efficiency in the form of HERS 35. That's a building standard. The airport's already committing to a high level of energy efficiency and doesn't believe it needs to commit to this specific level. By the time the crew quarters are constructed, the technology might have changed. So, we're already committing to a very high level of energy efficiency there. And the EPA doesn't believe the project will pose a significant threat to groundwater, which we agreed with that. All right, so those are the comments and proposed responses. And it sounds like we're pretty good to go with our proposal with a few tweaks. We'll have to have a further conversation with Tom about this idea of an operational plan or commitments to include in the FEIR.
I don't think it was necessarily to be included in the FEIR, but it would be part of the end product.
Okay.
But we can talk about that. Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
Hearing none, seeing none. Thank you very much, Jed. Very thorough job. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your patience.
All right, can we whip through the rest of this, Mr. Rafter?
We'll try. There's a couple other things still going on at the airport. Taxiway Echo, we're looking to start back up the end of this month and have that completed by May 13th. It's going to require closure of a section between the run up to 2-4 and 1-5, as well as what's closed now at Alpha, and we're working with all the users on that. Security, there's a lot of trenching going on around the airport. That project's moving along well. Fuel farm rehab is going out to bid very soon. And we just had a meeting yesterday with our fuel supplier, could save us a few $100,000 on that project. Great Harbor Yacht Club, bids are out. Opening is March 24th. And hopefully construction will take place April 26th to the 30th. Hangar development, we're setting up a meeting with Mr. Turner, who is still interested in developing his hangar. And we're awaiting a response from Mr. Hagedorn. ASMP grant applications, as you know, we put in a lot. We heard from the state that they're going to be funding most of those. In fact, we've received 2 grants today, one for the stormwater and one for the zero-turn mower. So they're working with us to try to get us as much money as possible, which is great.
Excuse me, do we need to approve those?
I don't think so. I think it was the grant application. This is the actual grant. They're giving us the money, so it may require a signature, but I'll have to see it. Yeah, I think it's an agreement. But again, that would just go to next month's meeting,
Okay,
because we're probably going to get a few more in within the next couple of days. That's the way they normally work. A number of RFPs and bids being worked on Bunker Road. Operationally, fuel sales were up 46% last month. And while it's all relative, the Jet A gallons were pumped were up 94% last month over the previous year. Air Service, American Airlines announced Chicago service for Saturdays this summer. And in a recent video provided by an air service consultant, he identified that we are the second fastest growing airport in the country. Our certain inspection is May 26th to 28th. The full-scale exercise is tentatively set for April 26th at 4 p.m. And just so everyone's aware, we're presenting a PFAS case study at the airport's conference on March 16th. It's a virtual one with the team that you had on earlier. And we're anticipating receiving about $1.5 million in grants from the second CARES Act. Unfortunately, we don't have, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have statistics available. Personnel, though, I'm proud to report that Lil has passed her 3rd MCPPO procurement class, which is design, construction, contracting, is now eligible to apply for designation of the Associate Certified Public Purchasing Office through MCPPO. And Katie has also passed her test and continuing. And today, Libby was over to provide service pins to 3 employees, 20-year employees, Blaine Buckley, Gary Allen, and Kirby Fowler. And that's all I have.
great, thank you. Are there any commissioners' comments? Mr. Buscarin,
None.
Ms. Topham, Mr. Gasparo?
No, just thanks for hearing me out on the other topic.
Okay, thank you. I just have one as a heads up at the April meeting, which will probably be another long meeting. Rob McNeil from the DPW and Ken Bogrand, who's the town's real estate consultant, will be probably are scheduled to be making a presentation on using some of the land on Nobadeer Farm Road up to Sconset Road for a DPW depot to move their equipment away from the Nantucket landfill to what they deem as a more central location. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's coming. And is there any public comment at this time? Seeing no hands up, I will entertain a motion to go in. I will thank you again, Rich and Jed, for your, or Jed, I guess is gone, but for your.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion to go into executive session, not to return to public session, to review the minutes as enumerated on the agenda under Clause 7 to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements regarding proposed Transportation Security Administration actions where the chair has determined that open session may have a detrimental effect on the security of the airport. C, under Clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to the litigation regarding Walsh, where the chair has determined that an open session may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. And under Clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, where the chair has determined that an open session may have detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the airport. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Was there a second? Ms. Topham, did you second?
I did second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye.
Right.
Good night, Rich. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
Can someone check the
YouTube?
YouTube to make sure that it gets turned off before we start
I will.
executive session?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Topham, did you second?
Aye.